This is the River Severn as it runs through the very pretty city of Worcester. Here we're about 30 miles from Gas Street Basin in Birmingham, with the two being connected by the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. And today we're going to cycle the full length of this scenic canal, learning about some of the history and some of the interesting things that we see along the way. This is a cracking ride, so stick around and come along with me as we follow this fantastic route all the way from Birmingham to Worcester. Our route begins at Gas Street Basin, this historically very important wharf in the centre of Birmingham. It's just 5 minutes ride from New Street Station, and that's how I've got here today. This once industrial hub is now a trendy area surrounded by bars and restaurants. Modern glass skyscrapers meet old wharf buildings and factories. It's also the meeting point of the Birmingham Mainline Canal, which runs up to Wolverhampton, and the Worcester and Birmingham Canal, which runs down to Worcester, and the canal that we're following today. The two canals met at the Worcester Bar, which used to be a physical barrier that ran all the way across the basin, making sure that no water could leak from the Birmingham Canal system into the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. From 1792 to 1815, goods had to be physically manhandled between the two canals, until an Act of Parliament forced the Birmingham Canal Company to allow a stop lock to be opened in between the two canals, allowing boats to pass between the two canals. And this is where we're going to be starting our ride today. Here on the left is the Birmingham Canal, and on the right the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. So let's get going. If you're wondering why Gas Street Basin looks so devoid of people, it's because I set off very early in the morning to enable me to get these shots around Gas Street Basin without the normal hustle and bustle that goes on here. And that would definitely be a recommendation, to set off early from Birmingham so you have a nice quiet towpath as you leave the city centre. Gas Street Basin is named after Gas Street, which runs along the western edge of the basin, which was given that name because it was the first street in Birmingham to be illuminated by gaslight. The canal heads towards the mailbox, previously a location of a railway goods yard, allowing goods to be transferred from canal to railway and vice versa. After the goods yard closed, the area was taken over by Royal Mail, and the location became the main sorting office for Birmingham, hence the name of the building currently there, the Mailbox, which is a mixed-use development containing hotels, offices and restaurants. After making a 90-degree turn, we head for the bridge under Granville Street, along a fairly bumpy section of cobbles. But once we pass under Granville Street, the towpath becomes much better, with a nice smooth hard surface. We also leave the restaurants and the pubs behind and head out into a much more suburban feeling area, as the canal heads towards Edgbaston. Edgbaston is probably most famous for its cricket ground, which not only hosts a number of international matches, but is also the home for Warwickshire County Cricket Club. Much more excitingly, Edgbaston is the site of one of the 5 tunnels on the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. The Edgbaston Tunnel is 105 yards long, or 96 metres in new money. It's notable as it's the only tunnel on this canal that has a towpath running along the side, so happily we're able to cycle through. For the other 4 tunnels, we're not so lucky, and we are going to have to make some detours. But if you're worried about getting lost, I have left the Garmin Connect and Komoot route links to this route in the video description. If you want to say thanks for that route, or just thanks for the video, you can also buy me a coffee via the link in the video description also. You can also help me out by subscribing to the channel and dropping this video a like. Construction of the Worcester and Birmingham Canal began in 1792, but at Selly Oak we approach a much more modern part of the canal, the aerial aqueduct. This was completed in 2011 and allowed an improved A38 road to pass underneath the canal. The aqueduct takes its name from the nearby aerial factory, which closed down in 1963. This produced bikes, motorcycles and cars. From the top of the aqueduct we also get a good view of the Birmingham University buildings and the clock tower in the centre, known as Old Joe. A little further on from the aqueduct we come across what was the first junction on this canal, next to the Sainsbury's and Selly Oak Retail Park. Here the Dudley No. 2 Canal joined with the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. The Dudley No. 2 Canal closed in stages, but the section from here over to California, where there was a brickworks, was open until 1953, when it closed with the closure of the brickworks and was filled in and redeveloped. Here the path of the canal has a Sainsbury's built over the top of it. However, when the Sainsbury's was built, there was an alternative path under the building here at the end, kept open if the canal is ever to reopen. There is an active restoration trust working on that possibility, and if you want to learn a bit more about the Dudley No. 2 canal, I cycled the old route of it in my video A Dudley Loop. I'll leave a link to that in the video description. We're now coming into the Bournville area of Birmingham, and that only means one thing: chocolate, and in my opinion the best chocolate in the world. This is the Cadbury factory at Bournville. The Cadbury family moved their operations here in 1879 after their original city centre location became too small for the expanding business. Cadbury was extremely reliant on the canals for their milk deliveries, so this location was chosen as it was next to the canal, and also had the railway at the side, which was used to deliver cocoa from ports in the south of England. Cadbury also had a factory in Blackpool, Worcester, so the canal was an important link between those two factories. After passing Bournville, the canal towpath briefly swaps sides before heading back to the western side of the canal. We then come to the next junction on the canal, which is Kings Norton Junction, where the Stratford-upon-Avon Canal meets the Worcester and Birmingham Canal. This first section of canal from Birmingham to Kings Norton Junction was complete by May 1796. With construction of the canal only taking place in one direction, from Birmingham down to Worcester, not in multiple places or multiple directions to meet in the middle. Directly in front of us there is the Stratford-upon-Avon Canal, and we've just come from the left under the bridge. And we're now going to continue our journey south down the Worcester and Birmingham Canal to our right here. If you want to learn a little bit more about the Stratford-upon-Avon Canal, I rode some of that in my Brummie Loop video, and I'll leave a link in the description to that. We're now approaching the Wast Hills Tunnel, which was opened in 1797 and allowed the canal to trade as far as Hopwood. At 2,726 yards long, or almost 2,500 metres, this is by far the longest tunnel on the canal, and unfortunately it doesn't have a towpath, so we're going to need to go up and over this tunnel and rejoin the route of the canal at Hopwood, just south of Birmingham. That unfortunately means we have to deal with something we haven't dealt with yet on this ride: an upwards gradient. So far this ride has been completely flat, with not a lock in sight. The towpath brings us out onto Foyle Road, which we need to cross over and head to Shannon Road, which will take us through this large housing estate in Hawksley. There's a few twists and turns along the way as we make our way through the housing estate, but we eventually end up on Red Hill Road and take a left into Wast Hills Lane. And it's here, almost 8 miles into the ride, that you really feel that you have left Birmingham. The housing estates and the traffic replaced by farms, fields and cows. Although we are cycling on the road, Wast Hills Lane is really a very quiet stretch of road with not a lot of traffic, and it's surrounded by countryside, so it really is a very pleasant piece of riding. And to cheer you up even more, we're now coming to the high point of this ride, a lofty 190 metres, or just over 600 feet. And from here it's pretty much downhill all the way to Worcester, apart from the other tunnels of course that we need to make our way over. But for now we can enjoy some downhill cycling as we finish off this 2-mile stretch of road riding that has taken us over the top of Wast Hill Tunnel. The turning for the towpath is a little bit hidden away, so don't go too mad down here. Once you see this house on the right, we're really not far from the turning. It's hidden just in the bushes here on the right hand side. And one last short little descent takes us back to the towpath next to the canal, as it emerges from the Wast Hill Tunnel. And that's the longest bit of road riding we have to do in this entire ride to Worcester, as we've passed over the longest tunnel on this canal. The canal then heads under this very pretty bridge, which takes Lee End Lane over the canal. This bridge is numbered number 69. And that leads me on to the numbering system of the bridges on this canal. Yep, this channel is the place to get the information you never knew you needed. So the bridges on this canal are numbered on the way up from Worcester to Birmingham. So bridge number 1 is the first one next to the River Severn, and the bridge just before you enter Gas Street Basin heading north is bridge number 88. So it's a good way to know how far down the canal you are. The smaller that number, the closer you are to Worcester. And if that bridge wasn't there when the canal was first built, to make the bridges fit in with the numbering system, they're given a lettered denomination after the number, such as 62A, I'll try and point one of those out as we go down the canal. I know, exciting stuff. As we pass under bridge number 68, the towpath does narrow a little bit. It was quite a wide gravel track when we first entered after the Wast Tunnel, but it's still quite a pleasant ride. We pass through the rather pretty village of Hopwood, where you will find a shop and a pub should you need it, and then we head through a cutting where the towpath improves quite a bit. It's actually a solid surface here, which is nice. Then, as we approach Lower Biddle Reservoir, we even get a concrete towpath, although it is quite broken up in places. Before we get a view of the reservoir, we pass the very picturesque Keeper's Cottage, which was originally built for the keeper of the reservoirs, the person in charge of letting water in and out of the reservoirs and into the canal. And past the cottage we get a view of Lower Biddle Reservoir. There are actually two reservoirs here, this being Lower Biddle, and there's also an Upper Biddle Reservoir behind it that we can't see. These were finished in 1836 to help provide water to the canal and make sure the many locks on the way down to Worcester were kept full of water. After passing the reservoir we come across something a bit more modern, the M42 motorway. This crosses over the canal on bridge 64B. There you go, there's one of those letter denominations letting us know, unsurprisingly, that the M42 motorway wasn't here when the canal was built. Construction on the M42 actually started in 1976, almost 200 years after the building of the canal. It runs for 40 miles and construction was completed in 1989. Not long after passing under the motorway, we come to what appears to be a junction in the canal, but not all is as it seems. This was never a junction on the canal. This is actually where the canal has been rerouted due to the building of the M42 motorway. It was easier to cross the canal where it now sits, meaning that the motorway didn't have to have such high embankments and such a high bridge to cross the canal. The old section of canal south of the motorway was left in place and not filled in. It now exists as a nature reserve only and is not navigable by boats. We're now just over 11 miles into this journey and passing round the village of Alvechurch. It's a rather large village, so it does get a little busy around here, although busy is a relative term. Compared to Birmingham, this is not busy. The towpath also gets a lot better as we pass round the village, and it's a very pretty ride with a lot of hire boats parked up. In fact, there's a lot of places down this canal where you'll find large hire boat centres. With this being such a picturesque canal, obviously a lot of people want to make their way down it. You can also see the large crane here on the wharf, which is used for lifting boats in and out of the water for maintenance. The towpath quietens down as we leave the village, and we're heading to a cutting where we get the first sight of the next tunnel on this journey, the Shortwood Tunnel. This tunnel is 613 yards long, or 561 metres, and apparently it's prone to having water drip from its roof, so boaters will often wear waterproofs as they head through this tunnel. Unfortunately, we can't go through the tunnel as there is no towpath, so we need to head up and over again, up this rather steep path at the side. Things get a bit gnarly as we make our way up this path. I'd recommend probably getting off and pushing your bike up these steps here, but it's a case of do as I say, not do as I do. And at the top of the hill, the path brings us out into a lovely open field. The path, or towpath I suppose I should say, carries on directly through this field, and at the bottom of the field we take a slight left and head into the woods, which will take us back to the canal. There is an arrow pointed in the right direction, but it's certainly not the clearest sign in the world. I then pass this fencing on the right, which I didn't think much of at the time, but it had soon become very clear why it was there. As we get back to the canal and head along its right hand side, we find that the towpath is blocked by a number of fallen trees. However, none of these were huge and they were perfectly passable by carrying the bike over. After making it over those few fallen trees, we then have to share the towpath with a pipe, which I'm assuming has been put here to help with drainage, which may be the reason that the trees have fallen over in the first place if the drainage wasn't sufficient. The towpath then becomes wide enough for us to cycle down the side of the pipe before it disappears completely, and at this point I thought I was out of the woods. However, the towpath then becomes quite overgrown, and I did take a few nettle stings to the legs. We are then faced with yet another fallen tree, which was fairly easy to make my way over. But we then come to two rather large fallen trees, which were a bit more difficult to get over. This first one required me to lift the bike pretty high and then to climb over myself with the bike, which was not the easiest thing in the world. I then had to squeeze the bike through this small gap here, which I don't think looks as bad on camera as it actually was in person. This was really tricky trying to squeeze the bike through the gap, with branches catching on every bit of the bike as I tried to push it through.
Yeah, it's fun, isn't it?
I had a friendly chat with a jogger behind me who was also struggling to make his way over the trees, and then we came onto this part of the towpath, which was also very overgrown. Fortunately, this was just a short section where it was overgrown, and we're soon at the next bridge where we find some more of this fencing, and I actually bothered to read the sign on the fencing this time, which stated that the towpath was closed due to fallen trees, which is why it must have been so overgrown. There is a path there on the right that looks like it might avoid that section of towpath, however there's no clear signs to say that that is the diversion. If you really want to avoid that section, which can be tricky, I would definitely leave the canal at Grange Lane just before the tunnel, and use that in combination with Stony Lane and Wharf Lane to bypass the tunnel and that section of canal. Fortunately, we're now past that section, and although the towpath does narrow again and some of the vegetation from the sides is sticking across the towpath, that was definitely the worst section that we've passed. There's nothing even remotely close to that bad on the rest of the canal. The next tunnel, Tardebigge Tunnel, is only a mile from Shortwood Tunnel, and so we're quickly having to leave the route of the canal again to make our way around this tunnel, which this time involves a little bit of road riding. We first head down Wharf Lane, and then when we get to the end we take a left turn and head over the bridge which will take us over the canal. We then immediately take a right, where the road starts to climb alongside the cutting which the canal heads into before it goes into the Tardebigge Tunnel. Partway up this road you will find a path on the right which will bring you down to have a look at the tunnel entrance if you want. The Tardebigge Tunnel is 530 metres long, or 580 yards, so if you get the right angle you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Our route over the tunnel brings us to the junction with a fairly busy road. However, we are going straight across here and into a field opposite. This section of the route is a footpath only. As you can see, this gate is not bicycle friendly. You will need to lift your bike over and push your bike along this next section. After a few hundred metres we come to a stile, which again requires a bit of bike lifting to make it over. And then we have a set of stairs, which bring us down to the busy dual carriageway known as Bromsgrove Highway. At this point I double and triple checked that this was correct, because this looked like madness. But it is true, indeed the public footpath crosses over this dual carriageway. You can see there's even a gap in the barriers to let you through. If I'm honest, this is really pretty unpleasant, being in the middle of a dual carriageway with traffic passing each side at 70 miles an hour. And I did have to wait in the middle for quite some time for a safe enough gap to cross. But eventually I did get across and continued along this footpath, which now only has about 50 metres to go before we get back to a road that we can cycle on. I wanted to take this route today because it sticks to the canal as close as possible, and it's also likely that this footpath exists because it was the route taken by the horses to pass over the tunnel back when they were needed to pull the boats. But this tunnel diversion has not been the most pleasant, and especially with this footpath section where you can't even cycle. Together with that section after the Shortwood Tunnel where we had the fallen trees and the overgrown towpath, have made the last few miles not the best. So what I've done for anybody that wants to avoid the two tunnels and that nasty bit of towpath in between them is put together a diversion route where you leave the towpath before you get to Shortwood Tunnel and rejoin the canal after Tardebigge Tunnel, a little further down the canal from here, and mostly uses single track country lanes which are pleasant to cycle on. I'll leave the Garmin Connect and Commute links to that in the video description, as well as the route links to this route that I've taken today, which takes as much of the canal in as possible. If you want to say thank you for those route links, you can buy me a coffee via the link in the video description too. And if you've watched the video this far, please do make sure you subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free and it really does help to keep the channel afloat. We've now made it to Tardebigge Wharf as we've rejoined the canal. Behind us we can see the southern entrance to the Tardebigge Tunnel, and in front of us on the opposite side of the canal is Tardebigge Wharf. The canal reached here in 1807, a full 15 years after construction began in 1792 in the centre of Birmingham. Now by modern standards, if HS2 is anything to go by, that might seem like not a bad rate of construction. However, back in the canal building days, that was actually pretty slow. They could knock out a 20-mile canal in 4 or 5 years quite easily, even with tunnels. But in 15 years, they only made it 15 miles from Birmingham. It was built so slowly mainly due to financial restrictions. They simply didn't have the money to progress the canal as quickly as they would have hoped. And that lack of money had a big impact on the next 15 miles to Worcester, where we passed down 58 locks. After coming this far without encountering a lock, the boats would come to the first lock here at Tardebigge, which is currently undergoing some restoration work, which meant I had to cross over the canal on a pontoon, down a temporary towpath, and again cross over the canal after the lock on another pontoon. I've since read that the repairs on the lock have now been completed and that the lock is reopened, so your experience may vary here. Now this is Tardebigge Top Lock. It is at the top of the Tardebigge flight of locks, which is 30 locks in total. It's actually the longest lock flight in Britain. And today we're going to pass down every single one of those locks, including the other 28 locks that will take us to Worcester. So time to get a move on. From Tardebigge, the 58 locks will drop us 130 metres from the Birmingham level down to where the canal meets the River Severn. Up until Tardebigge, the canal was built as a double barge width canal, which would allow 14 feet width boats to travel up and down its length, double the width of a standard narrowboat. However, when it came to building the locks, those financial constraints which slowed down the construction of the canal came into play again. It was decided that it would be too expensive to build the locks to take 14-foot wide boats, and so the plans were changed and the locks were built as standard narrowboat locks, 7 foot wide, half the width of the original plans. The towpath after Tardebigge is actually pretty good. As you can see, it's a wide gravel surface track. It's actually in better condition than the canal at this point. As you can see, having that lock closed at Tardebigge has meant that weed has built up as not many boats have passed through this way. There's quite a distance between the first and second lock in this flight, but we're soon at lock number 57, and from here we get a great view down the lock flight, with the locks now coming thick and fast. So let's get going, as we've got 57 more to go before we get to Worcester. It's a very pretty ride down this lock flight, and the towpath continues to be fairly wide and fairly well surfaced, although you're not going to be able to do this on a road bike, as you've probably figured out by now. I'm using my gravel bike today and I'm on 45mm tyres, which are more than enough for this journey. Partway down the lock flight we come to Tardebigge Reservoir. This was built to help supply water to the lock flight. As you can imagine, 30 locks here at Tardebigge use an awful lot of water. Although today, after a long dry summer, it's not looking like it would be much help, unfortunately. The canal continues to drop after the reservoir. Lock after lock we descend, and the towpath continues to be pretty decent. Finally, after descending 30 locks, on the southern edge of Bromsgrove we come to Tardebigge Bottom Lock. So that's 30 locks down, 28 to go, and what a pretty lock flight this first one has been. After a surprisingly short amount of time, we're at the next lock flight, the Stoke lock flight. This flight of locks has 6 locks and will take us down to just 22 locks to go. We're now heading through the village of Stoke Prior to the south of Bromsgrove, and although this is quite a rural area, we are surrounded by industrial units both on the right hand side and the left hand side of the canal. And I suppose that should come as no surprise really. This canal was sort of the motorway of its day. We could even say maybe the M5 of its day, as it took traffic from Birmingham down towards the southwest. So naturally, industry was attracted to being by the canal because it provided very good transport links to the rest of the country. Here a little further down, we come to what would have been an old wharf to service the industry in this area. You can see there's a bridge that now goes over nothing. This would have been the entrance to the wharf or a small arm of the canal, which was built to service the industry around it, now which has been built over by a new housing development. Just before we leave Stoke Prior, we come past a very nice looking pub, the boat and railway. Obviously the first part of the name coming from the fact that the pub is on the canal, but it also has the railway not too far behind it. That is the main line between Birmingham and Worcester. The pub is 18.5 miles from the start of this journey in Birmingham, and with 12 miles to go, it might be a nice place to stop. For me, I'm carrying everything I need, so I'm going to carry on down these locks. We're now on the Astwood lock flight, which is another flight of 6 locks. And it's in fairly open countryside here. You can see we are surrounded by fields and it's very pretty. The towpath is also pretty good, a nice gravel surface. In fact, the towpath has been pretty good since we left that last tunnel at Tardebigge. It has narrowed in places, but it's generally been a solid surface. The towpath does start to get worse as we head towards Droitwich. In places it gets very narrow and the reed on the right really encroaches on the space. And although this is freshly laid gravel, it hasn't been compacted, so it's really mushy and really difficult to ride through. It's great that maintenance has been carried out and gravel has been laid down, and that will improve in the future as the gravel gets more compact. But at the moment it is a little difficult to get over, and as you can see there's lots of these narrow sections as well. This poor surface took its toll, as just before Droitwich I ended up getting a puncture. Fortunately, I always carry a puncture repair kit, a spare tube and a mini pump with me, as well as some tyre levers, so I had everything I needed to make the repair on the side of the canal, and I was soon ready to be on my way again. You can see the towpath here is pretty much a dirt track, although it's very well trodden, so it's clearly defined. It's quite firm underneath, so I think generally you wouldn't have any issues cycling down here as long as you've got decent sized tyres on your bike. I think the only time you'd have a problem is after extended periods of rain, when I can imagine this could get quite muddy. So if you're thinking about doing this ride, it might be best to do it during a drier period. We're soon coming to the outskirts of Droitwich and our next junction on this canal, the junction with the Droitwich Canal, known as Hanbury Junction. The Droitwich Canal was originally 2 separate canals, the first part being built in 1771, which linked the town of Droitwich Spa to the River Severn. And it was built to transport salt that was produced from the brine-rich springs in Droitwich down to the River Severn to be transported elsewhere around the country. The second canal was the Droitwich Junction Canal, which opened in 1854, relatively late in terms of canals. This was built to link the town of Droitwich and the original Droitwich Barge Canal to the Worcester and Birmingham Canal here at Hanbury Junction. Both canals fell into disuse in the early 1900s, and in 1939 both were abandoned. However, both had been subject to successful restoration plans, and by 2011 both canals had reopened and are now known as the Droitwich Canal. As we head south of Droitwich Spa, we come to some pretty bad sections of towpath. It's very narrow, and as you can see, the weeds on the side of the canal are extremely overgrown. The surface underneath is pretty solid, although again I think if there was a lot of rain this would be quite slippy. There's also some more sections of this freshly laid gravel, which in the video I'm sure it looks absolutely fine, but this was quite difficult to cycle on. As I've said earlier in the video, this has not really been compacted, so it's quite mushy and feels a bit like cycling through treacle. We then come to the 5th and final tunnel of the canal, the Dunhampstead Tunnel. This is a relatively short tunnel at 230 yards. Unfortunately, the towpath that leads up the side of the cutting has collapsed into the canal, so they've had to build these steps and wooden walkway to take the path up to the top of the tunnel. And that means lifting your bike up the steps and then at the other end of the walkway, carrying them down the steps again. Now I had no problem doing this, but I do understand that some people might not be able to do this. So the route links that I've supplied in the video description, both for Komoot and Garmin Connect, have a tunnel diversion route. This route will divert you around the Shortwood, Tardebigge and the Dunhampstead tunnel here, not having to use any of these difficult sections that we've found around those tunnels. Again, those routes do go on the road, but they're mostly quiet lanes. I've also supplied, as I've said earlier, the route for this that I'm taking today, which follows the canal as closely as possible. So after heading down this gravel track here, we go straight across the tarmac path and head down what appears to be somebody's driveway. But I promise you, this is an open path and we are able to cycle down it. At the end of this gravel track, we take a left turn to head back down towards the towpath. and after a pleasant descent we're back again next to the canal. It's a real shame that the steps had to be installed at the start of that tunnel, because otherwise this is quite a pleasant diversion on lovely gravel tracks. We pass by a nice little cafe, although according to Google this is temporarily closed, so if there's any locals that know what's happening with this cafe, please do let me know, because it looks like a lovely place to stop. If you are desperate to stop here though, if you come off the canal and head left, there is another cafe just a little further up. The towpath also starts to improve from here. You can see it's a little bit wider here and there's a definite gravel surface underneath. As I passed the village of Oddingley, I couldn't help but stop and take in the view. The views along this canal have been pretty good, but that one was exceptionally nice. And so as the towpath turned to tarmac and the M5 came into view, I was almost a little disappointed, as I knew this journey was coming to an end. By the looks of the speed of the traffic up there on the M5, this was definitely the better option to get from Birmingham to Worcester. Definitely more pretty as well. This section of the M5 was completed in 1962. It was actually the first section of the M5 to be opened, which now runs all the way from its junction with the M6 north of Birmingham down to Exeter. From here we have this solid tarmac towpath the whole way to the River Severn, and we have 14 more locks to descend on this journey. As we pass under the A449 dual carriageway, we officially enter the city of Worcester. Famous worldwide for its sauce, officially known as Worcestershire sauce, but we all know it as Worcester sauce. Worcester sauce was invented by the pharmacists John Wheely Lee and William Henry Perrins, giving the company the name Lee & Perrins. They came up with the recipe in the early 19th century, and in 1837 they commercialised this fish-based fermented sauce. And although since then the company has undergone numerous owners, the sauce is still made in Worcester today. As we get close to the centre of Worcester, we pass under this gorgeous viaduct, built in the 1850s for the Worcester and Hereford Railway to pass over the canal. It's somewhat unusual as it features a round hole above the arch which carries the road underneath. Just past the viaduct we also have a small arm of the canal heading off to a marina. The canal is pretty busy in parts heading through Worcester, as you'd expect in a city centre, so do take it easy, make sure you've got your bell and slow down for pedestrians. The towpath also crosses over from side to side a couple of times as we head through Worcester, but it's pretty easy to follow. And not long after crossing over the canal at George Street to head down the left side, we get some great views of Worcester's most iconic structure. This is of course Worcester Cathedral, which was founded in the year 680, although the earliest parts of the building we see today were built in 1084. I mean, it's virtually modern. The central spire, which is so iconic, was completed in 1374. Absolutely amazing that it still stands, and it's a beautiful building. Much of the original sandstone used in the building came from Shropshire, specifically around the Highley area, and it was transported here down the River Severn. Construction of the canal to this point in Worcester took until 1815, a full 22 years after construction began in 1792. We're almost at the end of the canal now, but first we've got to pass through Diglis Basin. This was not completed till 1894, and it was first proposed by Worcester City Council and designed to be somewhat of an inland port for Worcester. Today the area has been regenerated and it's now surrounded by shops, offices and a lot of cafes and restaurants, and I understand why. It really is a lovely place to sit and watch the boats go by. As we pass by some of those lovely homes and offices that have recently been built, my Garmin starts to sing out a celebratory song. We've now reached the end of the canal and the end of today's route. This is where the Worcester and Birmingham Canal meets the River Severn. The final two locks that drop the canal into the River Severn are double width, like the original plan, and that allows rider boats to head up into Diglis Basin. And this one here right in front of us is lock number 1 of the canal. Behind the lock is the canal, in front is the River Severn. And we also have bridge number 1, signifying that we've come to the end of our journey today. From here, boats could head up and down the River Severn to carry on their journeys further afield. But for us, we have come to the end. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and let me know in the comments what you liked best, or let me know what you didn't like. Please do subscribe to the channel, it's absolutely free and helps keep the channel afloat. Don't forget that the route links to today's route can be found in the video description via Garmin or Komoot. I've left two versions, the one that we've done today which follows the canal as closely as possible, and the tunnel diversion route which takes you around those tricky parts around the Shortwood, Tardebigge and Dunhampstead tunnels. If you want to say thank you for those routes or thank you for the video, you can also buy me a coffee via a link in the video description. Most of all, thank you very much for watching and happy cycling.